If you want to know what autism is, there is a traditional academic answer that defines this condition as a developmental disorder that affects communication, behavior, and sensory processing.
Oftentimes, parents are so scared and worried about their child's future and how they're going to meet all of these needs and what does it mean and will my child be able to do all these things that I envisioned them doing.
A diagnosis is really not about the label. It's about all the doors that are opened because we do have that diagnosis. It helps us generate a roadmap. It helps us understand the profile of strengths and weaknesses so we can develop an appropriate education plan, intervention plan, and even future planning as the individual grows older.
Yes, an older child or adult can get diagnosed with autism. In fact, this is happening more and more frequently, due in part to increased awareness of autism across the lifespan. Historically, many people thought about autism only as a childhood condition, and most attention and resources were devoted to young children on the spectrum. However, we're realizing more and more now that autistic children grow into autistic adults. And in the next decade, in fact, over 700,000 autistic teens will reach adulthood.
A diagnosis is required for a person to access services. Many times insurance companies will require a diagnosis. Specific educational supports will require a diagnosis. So it is very important to get the diagnosis, but most importantly, it is a way of understanding what are those challenges that the individual faces and what are the strategies that have been developed that are evidence-based that help them overcome those challenges.
There are many reasons why someone on the spectrum may not receive a diagnosis until later in childhood or adulthood. One of these reasons is racial disparities in terms of accessing an evaluation and receiving a diagnosis. Another reason could be gender. Females are often diagnosed later than males on the spectrum. This is likely related to something called camouflaging or masking. Many autistic individuals, particularly females, find ways around things that an autistic person finds difficult, or they hide aspects of their autism in an attempt to fit in with others. A third reason why someone may not receive a diagnosis until later on in life is co-occurring mental health conditions, things like anxiety or depression. And these conditions can also mask some of the autism characteristics and may make it trickier for a clinician to diagnose autism.
If you're a parent that have just learned your son has autism, you might be feeling many things. Perhaps you're anxious or sad or angry. Maybe you're hopeful and willing to start doing things, and most likely you're feeling all this at the same time. It's okay. It's all gonna be okay.
You don't have to do everything right now, because in that moment when you think, I've got to look at their educational needs, I've got to look at feeding, I've got to look at medical, should I be looking at therapeutics? And all of these things can become, because there's so many, they can become overwhelming, and then you almost don't do anything. It's okay to just pick 2 or 3 things, and let's work on those, getting those things in place. And then once you're feeling comfortable, let's go on to add another thing.
Having a diagnosis can also lead to more effective self-advocacy, being able to speak up for yourself, say what you need, say what your strengths are, and say what your challenges are.
Feeling is that you're all by yourself and you've got to manage this, and that's just not accurate.
Know that there is a community willing to support you and your family. You are not alone.